Rancher took in a maid who couldn't speak, then froze when she called him Papa. In her sleep, Sarah's hands trembled as she stood in the doorway of the county employment office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Her head stayed down, eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. The clerk behind the desk shifted uncomfortably in his chair, pen tapping against a stack of forms. Name? Sarah approached the desk slowly, like a beaten dog expecting another kick. She took the pen with careful fingers and wrote in neat, precise letters, Sarah Chen. Age. She wrote 23. The clerk glanced up at her, then back at the paper. Can you cook? Sarah nodded once, sharp and quick. Clean? Another nod. Work with livestock? She hesitated, then nodded again. The clerk leaned back, studying her face. Why can't you speak, miss? Sarah's pen hovered over the paper for a long moment. The office felt too small, too quiet except for that damn buzzing light. Finally, she wrote 2 words. Lost it. Lost it how? Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't write anything else. Right. The clerk cleared his throat. Well, there's a position out at the Morrison Ranch. Housekeeping, cooking, general help. Pays fair. Housing included. He paused. Owner's not much for conversation either, if that matters to you. Sarah met his eyes for the first time since entering the office. She nodded. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in the passenger seat of the clerk's dusty pickup truck, watching endless fields roll past through cracked windows. The land stretched out flat and broken, dotted with rusted farm equipment and sagging fence posts. Everything looked abandoned, like God had given up on this corner of the world. Morrison's a good man, the clerk said, eyes on the road. Had some troubles a few years back. Lost his family. Been letting the place fall apart ever since. Sarah said nothing because she couldn't, but she understood. Some wounds went too deep for healing. The truck turned down a dirt drive that hadn't seen gravel in years. Jack Morrison's ranch house squatted at the end of it like a wounded animal. Paint peeled from the siding in long strips. The front porch sagged under the weight of broken dreams. Windows stared out like dead eyes. Jack Morrison emerged from the house as they pulled up. He was tall and weathered, with gray stubble covering his jaw and clothes that had seen too many days without washing. His eyes held the hollow look of a man who'd seen too much and cared too little. This the girl? He asked the clerk. Sarah Chen. She's got the experience you're looking for. Jack's gaze moved over Sarah like she was livestock at auction. Not cruel, just practical. Can you cook? Sarah nodded. Clean? Nod. Why don't you talk? Sarah pulled out the slip of paper where she'd written her answer. Jack read it, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the dirt. Don't care why. Can you do the work? Sarah nodded. Good. Clerk, you can go. The truck disappeared down the drive in a cloud of dust, leaving Sarah alone with this broken man and his broken house. Jack studied her for another moment, then jerked his head toward the porch steps. Sit. They sat on opposite ends of the sagging porch. Jack pulled out a pouch of tobacco and rolled a cigarette with practiced hands. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire. $70 a week, Jack said finally. Plus room and board. You cook 3 meals a day, keep the house clean, do laundry, don't go in the master bedroom, don't ask questions, don't expect conversation. Sarah nodded to each point. Room's off the kitchen. Small, but it's got a bed and a window. Bathroom's down the hall. He took a long drag from his cigarette. Why do you want this job? Sarah made a gesture toward the house, then to herself. Jack frowned. You need somewhere to hide? Sarah's face went rigid. She shook her head quickly. Somewhere to heal? This time she hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Jack's expression softened just a fraction. Yeah, I get that. He stood up, grinding the cigarette under his boot heel. Come on, I'll show you around. The inside of the house told the same story as the outside. Dishes stacked high in the sink, some growing things that might have been food once. Laundry piled in corners like snowdrifts. Empty whiskey bottles hidden behind furniture, tucked into cabinets, standing guard on windowsills. I don't need conversation, Jack said, leading her through rooms that smelled of neglect and grief. Just need someone who won't ask questions about why I drink, or why I sleep on the couch, or why there's pictures turned face down on every table in this house. Sarah looked around at the evidence of a life fallen apart. She understood that too. Jack stopped at a door off the kitchen. "This is yours." The room was small but clean. A single bed with a faded quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, one window looking out at empty fields. It was more than she'd had in months. Jack cleared his throat. "You start tomorrow. Breakfast at 6. Sarah nodded, then pointed to herself and made a questioning gesture. "What about you? You got stuff to bring in?" Sarah held up one finger, then walked back to the porch where she'd left a single canvas bag. Everything she owned in the world fit in that bag. Jack watched her unpack from the doorway. 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a small notebook and pen, and a photograph she kept face down. That was it. That was her life. When Sarah turned around, Jack was still there, studying her with those hollow eyes. For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that comes between 2 people who've lost everything that mattered. Then Jack stepped back into the shadows of the hallway and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Sarah heard him moving around the kitchen, heard the clink of a bottle against glass. She sat on the edge of her new bed and looked out of the window at the dying light. Tomorrow she would start over again. Tomorrow she would try to heal in this house full of ghosts. But tonight, for the first time in months, she had a door she could close. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, listening to Jack's heavy footsteps fade down the hallway. The house creaked around her, settling into the kind of silence that felt thick and watchful. She folded her few belongings into the dresser drawers, each movement careful and quiet. When the house went still, she ventured out. The kitchen told stories in layers of neglect. Dishes crusted with food sat in towers by the sink. The refrigerator hummed loudly, struggling to keep working. Stuck to its front with a faded magnet was a child's drawing, the crayon colors bleeding and curling at the edges. A stick figure family under a yellow sun. Daddy, Mommy, and a little girl with pigtails. Sarah stared at it for a long moment, then moved on. Each room revealed more ghosts. The living room couch was buried under blankets and pillows, clearly where Jack slept now. Empty bottles lined the windowsill like sentries. Family photos sat face down on every surface, their backs turned to the world like sleeping faces. In the hallway, Sarah found the master bedroom door slightly ajar. She pushed it open carefully. The bed was made but covered in dust. Women's clothes still hung in the closet, waiting for someone who would never come home. A hairbrush sat on the dresser, strands of dark hair still caught in its bristles. Sarah backed out quickly and closed the door. She started in the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves. The work felt good, familiar. Her hands knew how to scrub and stack and organize. She moved methodically, creating order from chaos, one dish at a time. Jack stayed outside. Through the window, she watched him moving among the cattle, his shoulders hunched against whatever weight he carried. When noon came and went without him appearing for lunch, Sarah kept a plate warm on the stove. At 1 o'clock, Jack's boots sounded on the porch steps. He pushed through the kitchen door and stopped short at the sight of a hot meal waiting on the table. Steam rose from a plate of eggs and bacon, fresh coffee in a clean mug beside it. "You didn't have to." Sarah pointed to the piece of paper he'd given her yesterday, now smoothed flat on the counter. His own handwriting. "Cook, clean, general housework." "Right." Jack sat down and ate in silence while Sarah continued cleaning. She could feel him watching her sometimes, but when she glanced over, his eyes were on his plate. "Good eggs," he said finally. Sarah nodded without turning around. "Haven't had a proper meal in months." She kept scrubbing the same pan, waiting for him to say more. He didn't. When Jack finished eating, he pushed back from the table. "I'll be in the office if you need anything." Sarah watched him disappear down the hallway, then cleared his dishes. The house felt bigger, with just one person moving through it. She spent the afternoon working through the living room, organizing the chaos into neat piles. Jack's makeshift bed arrangement told its own story of a man who couldn't bear to sleep where he used to sleep. She found bottles hidden everywhere, some empty, some half full. She gathered them without judgment and set them on the counter. By evening, the main rooms looked like a house again, instead of a crime scene. Jack emerged from his office as darkness fell outside. He surveyed the transformed living room without comment, then moved to the kitchen. Sarah had dinner waiting, the table set for 2. "Storm coming tonight," Jack said, settling into his chair. Sarah looked toward the windows, where lightning flickered in the distance. She nodded. "Hope you're not afraid of thunder." Sarah shook her head, but her hands tightened on her fork. "Big storms out here can be fierce. House is solid, though. Been through worse." They ate in relative quiet, the approaching thunder rumbling closer. Sarah found herself listening to the rhythm of Jack's breathing, the scrape of his fork against the plate. Small sounds that meant she wasn't alone. "You don't have to clean this much," Jack said suddenly. Sarah looked up, questioning. I appreciate it, but you're working too hard." Sarah shrugged and kept eating. "When's the last time you had a day off?" Sarah thought about it, then made a gesture that meant a long time. "Yeah, me too." After dinner, Sarah started on the dishes while Jack retreated to his office. She could hear him moving papers around, opening and closing drawers. Through the doorway, she glimpsed him hunched over a desk covered in ledgers and bills. As she dried the last plate, Sarah noticed the pile of blankets and pillows on the couch. She'd been careful not to disturb Jack's sleeping arrangement, but curiosity got the better of her. Jack appeared in the doorway as she was studying his makeshift bed. "Bed's more comfortable." Sarah gestured toward the couch, raised her eyebrows in question. "I like it here." Sarah didn't push, but she walked to the linen closet and pulled out fresh sheets. She folded them neatly and left them on the coffee table without a word. Jack watched her do this, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to take care of me." Sarah met his eyes and pointed to the job description again, still on the counter. "That's housework, not me." Sarah tilted her head, considering this. Then she pointed to the house around them, then to him, then back to the house. Her meaning was clear. "You're part of the house." Jack almost smiled. "Almost." "Stubborn." Sarah nodded, not ashamed of the accusation. The storm arrived in earnest then. Rain lashing against the windows. Jack returned to his office while Sarah finished her evening cleaning. The rhythm of their separate activities felt almost comfortable, like a dance they'd been practicing for years instead of days. Sarah found herself stealing glances toward the office doorway. Jack sat hunched over his desk, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, scratching numbers into a ledger. Sometimes he paused to stare at nothing, his pen suspended in midair. When she looked up from wiping the counter, she caught him watching her too. Their eyes met for a moment across the space between kitchen and office. Neither acknowledged it, but neither looked away immediately either. Finally, Jack closed his ledger with a soft thud. He stood, stretched, and walked toward his pile of blankets on the couch. "Night, Sarah." Sarah nodded, hanging up the dish towel. She retreated to her small room as Jack settled onto the couch. The house creaked and sighed around them, adjusting to the presence of two people trying to heal in the same broken space. Through her thin door, Sarah could hear Jack moving restlessly, blankets rustling. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the silence felt less empty than it had the night before. The house settled into the kind of silence that felt heavy, pressing down on everything like a held breath. Jack lay on his makeshift bed in the living room, staring at shadows that moved across the ceiling with each flash of distant lightning. The storm had passed, but the air still felt electric, charged with something waiting to happen. Sarah's room was quiet beyond the thin wall that separated them. Too quiet, maybe. Jack had grown used to the small sounds people made in sleep, the unconscious sighs and shifts that meant life continuing even in darkness. His wife, Catherine, had been a restless sleeper, always moving, always dreaming. His daughter, Emma, had talked in her sleep sometimes, murmuring about school friends and playground adventures. But Sarah made no sound at all, like she'd trained herself to be invisible even while unconscious. Jack closed his eyes and tried to find sleep, but it slipped away from him like water through cupped hands. The whiskey should have helped, but tonight it only made his thoughts sharper, more jagged. He thought about the way Sarah had left those clean sheets on the coffee table. A small kindness that felt bigger than it should have. Around 2 a.m, a sound cut through the silence, not loud, barely audible through the wall, but distinct enough to make Jack's eyes snap open. A whimpering noise, soft and broken, like an animal in pain. Jack sat up slowly, listening. The sound came again, followed by something that made his blood freeze in his veins. "Papa, don't go." The words were clear as daylight, spoken in a voice that wasn't quite Sarah's, younger, smaller, carrying the desperate edge of a child who understood abandonment too well. "Papa, please!" Jack's hands started shaking. He reached for the bottle on the floor beside the couch, then stopped, his fingers hovering over the glass. The voice continued, and it was definitely coming from Sarah's room. "I'll be good, Papa. I promise. I'll be good." Jack stood up, his bare feet silent on the wooden floor. He moved toward Sarah's door like a man walking through deep water. Each step slower than the last. His hand reached for the doorknob, then froze as the voice came again. "Papa, why won't you come back?" The words hit Jack like physical blows. The voice was young, maybe 12 or 13, but it was coming from the woman sleeping in the next room. Sarah's voice, but not Sarah's voice. A child's voice trapped inside an adult body, calling out to someone who would never answer. Jack staggered backward, his shoulder hitting the wall hard enough to rattle a picture frame. His breathing came fast and shallow, and for a moment the hallway seemed to spin around him. He pressed his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, listening to that broken child's voice calling for a father who was gone. The sounds went on for another hour, sometimes words, sometimes just crying. Jack sat in the hallway and listened to every heartbreaking sound, his own ghosts stirring in response. By the time silence returned, his face was wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. Morning came like a punishment. Jack dragged himself off the floor, his back screaming from sleeping against the wall. He made coffee with hands that still trembled, trying to figure out how to face Sarah after what he'd heard. She appeared in the kitchen doorway at exactly 6 o'clock, same as always, hair neat, clothes clean, face composed. She moved to the stove and began preparing breakfast without a word, as if the night had never happened. "Sleep well?" Sarah nodded without turning around, cracking eggs into a pan with steady hands. "Any dreams?" Sarah paused, spatula suspended over the skillet. She shook her head once, sharp and definitive. "You talk in your sleep." The spatula clattered against the pan. Sarah froze completely, her entire body going rigid. Slowly, carefully, she turned to face him. Her eyes were wide and frightened, like a cornered animal. "You called someone Papa." Sarah's face went white. She grabbed the counter for support, her knuckles standing out stark against her skin. Her mouth opened and closed without making a sound. Jack approached her carefully, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "Sarah, who's your father?" Sarah shook her head frantically, backing away from him until she hit the refrigerator. The child's drawing rustled against her shoulder. "Is he alive?" More frantic shaking, her eyes darting toward the door like she was measuring the distance to escape. What happened to him? That broke something inside her. Sarah bolted from the kitchen, her bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. Jack followed, finding her on the front porch in the morning light, bent over with her hands on her knees, hyperventilating. "Sarah." She didn't look up. "Sarah, look at me." She wouldn't, couldn't. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps that sounded like sobs. "I'm not going to hurt you." Finally, she looked up. Tears streamed down her face, and in her eyes Jack saw the same terror he'd heard in that child's voice during the night. Raw, absolute fear mixed with shame so deep it seemed to eat at her from the inside. "Tell me what happened." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly ran back into the house. Jack heard her moving around in her room, then she reappeared with a pencil and a piece of paper. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pencil, but she wrote something and held it out to him. Jack took the paper and read the words written in Sarah's careful handwriting. "I killed him." The words seemed to hang in the air between them like smoke. Jack stared at the paper, reading the confession over and over, while Sarah stood in the doorway waiting for judgment. Her whole body trembled with the effort of staying upright, but her eyes never left his face. "How old were you?" Sarah held up one hand, fingers spread, then added 3 more fingers. 15. "How?" Sarah's face crumpled. She made a pushing motion with her hands, then pointed downward. Her meaning was clear enough. "He fell." Sarah nodded, tears falling faster now. "Downstairs?" Another nod. Jack looked at the paper again, then at Sarah's terrified face. In the morning light, she looked even younger than her 23 years. Young enough to be as Emma if Emma had lived. Young enough to be someone's little girl calling for her papa in the dark. "Were you protecting yourself?" Sarah's sob came out as a broken sound that might have been yes. She doubled over, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold her pieces together. Jack stood there with the confession in his hands, watching this broken woman fall apart on his front porch. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with all the words neither of them knew how to say. Sarah waited for him to throw her out, to call the sheriff, to do what everyone else had probably done when they learned her secret. Instead, Jack folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. The gesture was small, but Sarah saw it. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked at him with something that might have been hope. Jack stood on the front porch holding Sarah's confession, the paper trembling in his weathered hands. Sarah waited in the doorway. Her whole body braced for rejection, for disgust, for the inevitable moment when he would tell her to pack her bag and disappear. Her tears had stopped, but her face remained streaked and raw. Instead of anger, Jack's voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. "So did I." Sarah looked up, confused. Her eyes searched his face, trying to understand. Jack crumpled the paper in his fist and tossed it aside. It landed in the dirt beside the porch steps. Just another piece of trash in a world full of discarded things. "My daughter, my wife. I killed them both." Sarah's mouth opened slightly. She shook her head, not understanding. "Not with my hands." Jack continued, his voice getting stronger but more hollow. "With my selfishness. With my pride." Sarah stepped closer, pulling out her notebook. She wrote quickly. "How? I was sheriff in town. Thought I was untouchable. Thought my badge meant something." Jack's laugh was bitter, empty. "Made enemies. The wrong kind of enemies." "What happened?" Sarah wrote. "I was investigating some powerful people. Following money trails, asking questions nobody wanted asked, got too close to the truth about who really ran things around here. They came for you. They came for what I loved most." Jack moved to the window, staring out at the empty fields that stretched toward the horizon. His reflection looked like a ghost against the glass, pale and insubstantial. Emma was 8 years old, had pigtails and missing front teeth, and this laugh that could make you forget every bad thing that ever happened to you. His voice cracked. Catherine was 6 months pregnant. We were going to name the baby James if it was a boy, Julia if it was a girl. Sarah moved closer, her notebook forgotten. "They burned the house while I was in town, chasing shadows, following some fake lead that took me 20 miles away." Jack pressed his forehead against the window. "By the time I got back, there was nothing left but smoke and ashes." Sarah wrote, "I'm sorry. I found their bodies in the basement. Catherine had tried to get Emma to safety, but the stairs collapsed. Emma was still holding her mother's hand when I found them." Jack's shoulders shook. My little girl had tried to protect her mother even when she was dying. Sarah approached slowly, carefully, like she was approaching a wounded animal. She placed her hand on his arm, and Jack flinched but didn't pull away. "The bastards who did it are still walking around free, still running this county like their own personal kingdom, and I'm out here hiding like a coward." Sarah wrote something and held it up. "Not hiding. Healing." Jack looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. "What about your father?" Sarah's hand tightened on her pen. She wrote, "He was sick, bad sick, in his head. And he hurt me. For years. I was 15 when I couldn't take it anymore." Jack turned to face her fully. "How?" Sarah's writing became more shaky, pushed him down the stairs. He hit his head. "I watched him die." "Good." Sarah stared at him, shocked by the simple, brutal honesty of his response. "You were protecting yourself. People said I was evil, that I should hang. People are idiots. You survived. But I killed him. He was killing you first, just slower." Sarah looked down at her notebook, then back at Jack's face. She saw no judgment there, no disgust, only understanding. "How long did he hurt you?" "Since I was little, maybe 7 or 8. "Jesus Christ." Jack's hands clenched into fists. "And nobody helped you?" "Mama died when I was small. Nobody else cared. So you took care of yourself. That's not murder, Sarah. That's justice." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but these felt different, cleaner somehow. Jack walked to his office and pulled open a desk drawer. From inside, he extracted a faded photograph, its edges worn soft from handling. He carried it back to where Sarah stood and held it out to her. The photograph showed a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. She wore a sundress and held a kitten in her arms. Emma would be about your age now. Sarah studied the photo carefully, tracing the little girl's face with one finger. She wrote, "She looks happy." She was, before I failed her. Sarah looked up from the photograph to Jack's face. You didn't fail her. I should have protected her. You tried. You were doing your job. My job got her killed. Sarah shook her head firmly. She wrote, "Bad people got her killed. Not you." Jack studied Sarah's face, seeing something there he hadn't noticed before. You look like her sometimes, when you're concentrating on something. Same expression. Sarah looked down at the photograph again, and when she looked up, tears were streaming down her face, but she was almost smiling too. Keep it, Jack said when she tried to hand the photo back. Sarah shook her head, trying to return it. I want you to have it. Emma would have liked you, would have wanted someone like you to remember her. Sarah clutched the photograph to her chest like it was something precious. Her lips moved silently, and Jack thought he might have heard her whisper thank you, but couldn't be sure. Rain began pattering against the windows, gentle at first, then harder. The sound filled the silence between them, washing over the house like a benediction. We're quite a pair, Jack said finally. 2 killers hiding out in the middle of nowhere. Sarah wrote, 2 survivors. Jack almost smiled. Yeah, maybe that's better. The rain picked up intensity, drumming against the roof and windows. Sarah moved to look outside, still holding Emma's photograph. Storm's getting worse. Sarah nodded, watching water stream down the glass. You okay with storms? Sarah thought about it, then wrote, better than with silence. Yeah, I know what you mean. They stood together at the window, watching the rain wash over the empty fields. 2 broken people who had found something unexpected in each other's brokenness. Not healing, exactly, but recognition, understanding. Sarah? She looked at him. I'm glad you're here, Sarah wrote quickly. Me too. Even if we're both damned, especially then. Jack did smile then. The first real smile Sarah had seen from him. It transformed his whole face, made him look younger, less haunted. The rain continued to fall, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt completely alone with their ghosts. The house around them felt less empty, less cursed. Still broken maybe, but not beyond repair. Sarah looked down at Emma's photograph one more time, then carefully placed it on the windowsill where the little girl could watch over them both. Outside, lightning flickered in the distance, but inside, the silence between them had changed from something fearful to something almost peaceful. They had told their worst secrets and been accepted anyway. In a world that had shown them both nothing but cruelty, they had found something rare and precious, someone who understood what it meant to survive when survival required terrible choices. The storm raged on, but they weathered it together. Rain drummed against the windows through the night, a steady rhythm that seemed to wash the world clean. Sarah sat in the living room chair, Emma's photograph balanced carefully on her knees, studying the little girl's face in the lamplight. Jack had gone to bed on his couch, but she could hear him moving restlessly, sheets rustling with his nightmares. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air thick and heavy. Sarah made coffee and eggs while Jack sat at the kitchen table, quieter than usual. They had shared their darkest secrets the night before, and now the space between them felt different. Not uncomfortable, but charged with new understanding. More coffee? Jack nodded, holding out his cup. Sarah filled it, noticing how his hands trembled slightly, not from age or weakness, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe, or just the weight of carrying secrets for too long. Through the kitchen window, she saw dust rising from the dirt road, still visible despite the morning humidity. A vehicle was coming fast, kicking up clouds behind it. Sarah grabbed Jack's arm and pointed toward the window. Jack looked up, and his face went white. Shit! A black SUV emerged from the dust cloud, all tinted windows and government plates. It moved with purpose down the long drive toward the house. Sarah, go to your room. Lock the door. Sarah shook her head, staying exactly where she was. These aren't good men. Sarah wrote quickly on her notepad. Neither was my father. Jack stared at her for a moment, then nodded grimly. Stay behind me then. The SUV pulled up in front of the house and sat there for a moment, Engine running. Sarah could see shapes moving inside, but the tinted windows made it impossible to identify anyone. Finally, 3 doors opened simultaneously. The first man out was tall and lean, wearing a sheriff's uniform that looked too new, too clean. The second was older, heavy-set, in an expensive suit that didn't belong on a ranch. The third was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of face that had never known real hardship. Jack walked onto the front porch, Sarah close behind him. His posture had changed, shoulders straight, chin up. This was the man who had been sheriff once, the man who had worn authority like armor. Jack Morrison. Davies. Time to go. Go where? You know where. The older man in the suit stepped forward, his polished shoes already collecting dust. Jack, you've been quiet long enough. But words getting out, questions being asked. About what? About why you really left the sheriff's department. I retired. You ran, after you started investigating the wrong people. The younger man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the entitled edge of someone who had never been told no. My father says you had evidence, photos, documents. Jack's jaw tightened. Your father's dead, Tommy. Because you killed him. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt Jack's whole body go rigid beside her. Your father killed my family. I killed him for it. Prove it. I don't have to prove anything to you. Davies stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his weapon. Actually, you do. Tommy here's been asking the state attorney questions. About unsolved murders. About missing evidence files. Get off my property. We're not leaving without you, Jack. Like hell. Sarah had been listening to every word, her mind racing. These were the men who had destroyed Jack's life, who had killed his family and gotten away with it. Now they were back to finish what they started. She slipped quietly back into the house while the men continued their standoff on the porch. In Jack's office, she found what she was looking for. An old hunting rifle loaded and ready. Her father had taught her to shoot before he had taught her to fear him. Some lessons stuck deeper than others. Sarah emerged from the house slowly, the rifle held steady in her hands. All 4 men turned to look at her. Well, well, the hired help. Sarah leveled the rifle at Davies, her finger finding the trigger with practiced ease. She can't even talk, Jack. What's she gonna do? Sarah's voice came out cracked and unused, but clear as a church bell. Leave, now. All 4 men froze. Davies' mouth fell open slightly. Even Jack looked shocked. You can talk. I said leave. Davies recovered first, letting out a harsh laugh. Little girl with a big gun. How original. Sarah adjusted her grip, sighting down the barrel. You killed his family. Prove it. Don't have to. Tommy stepped forward, emboldened by Davies' dismissal. You're making a mistake, girl. We're law enforcement. You're murderers. Put the gun down before someone gets hurt. Sarah shifted her aim slightly and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked across the morning air like thunder. Davies jumped backward as dirt exploded near his feet, peppering his clean uniform with dust and debris. Next one goes in your chest. Davies' hand moved toward his weapon, but Sarah swung the rifle back to center on him. Don't. You just assaulted a police officer. I defended my home. This isn't your home. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more confident with each word. It is now. Jack stepped up beside her, his own voice finding its authority again. You heard her. Get off my land. Mayor Caldwell raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. Jack, be reasonable. We can work something out. Like you worked something out with my wife and daughter? That was a tragedy, but it's over now. It's not over until you're all in the ground. Davies finally drew his weapon, but Sarah was faster. She put a second shot into the dirt, closer this time, close enough that Davies felt the impact through his boots. I won't miss again. There are 3 of us. There are 2 of us, and we've got nothing left to lose. Jack moved to Sarah's left, creating a wider target spread. She's right, Davies. You killed everything I cared about. What do you think I'm afraid of now? Tommy's voice cracked with frustration. This is insane. We're trying to help you, Jack. Help me what? Help me disappear? Help me die quietly? Help you avoid a trial for murder? Whose murder? My father's. Jack's laugh was cold and empty. Your father got exactly what he deserved. The rain started again, light at first, then heavier. Water ran down Sarah's face, but her hands never wavered. She had found her voice after years of silence, and she wasn't going to lose it now. Last chance. she called out over the drumming rain. "Leave, or I start shooting for real." Davies looked at his companions, then back at the rifle pointed at his chest. The math was simple. 2 desperate people with nothing to lose against 3 men who still believed they had futures worth protecting. "This isn't over, Jack." "Yes, it is. We'll be back." "You won't." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "I said leave." The standoff stretched like a wire about to snap. Rain soaked through everyone's clothes, but nobody moved. Sarah's rifle remained steady, trained on Davies' center mass. Jack stood beside her, solid and unmoving. 3 armed men against 2 survivors who had already lost everything that mattered. The rain got heavier, turning the dust to mud, washing away the last illusions of civilized conversation. Sarah's fingers stayed steady on the trigger, ready to end this the way her father's story had ended, ready to protect the only family she had left. The rain pounded down harder, turning the dirt yard into muddy soup. Sarah kept the rifle trained on Davies while water streamed down her face, blurring her vision, but not her resolve. The 3 men stood in a loose semicircle, calculating their odds against 2 people who had nothing left to lose. Davies slowly reached for his service weapon, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Put it down, girl." "No, I'm a sheriff." "You're a murderer." Jack stepped protectively in front of Sarah, blocking Davies' line of sight to her. "She's right, Davies. You were there the night they died." "Prove it." "I have pictures." Tommy Caldwell lunged forward, his composure finally cracking. "Where are they?" "Safe place." "Bullshit. You're bluffing." "Try me." Davies drew his weapon in one smooth motion, but Jack was already moving. "Sarah, get down!" Davies fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of his pistol echoed across the empty fields like thunder. Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted her aim and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Davies screamed and spun sideways, blood blooming across his uniform shirt. The bullet had caught him high in the left shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee in the mud. "You bitch!" Jack tackled Tommy before he could draw his own weapon. They went down hard, rolling in the wet dirt, grappling for control. Tommy was younger, but Jack fought with the desperate fury of a man who had already lost everything that mattered. Deputy Mills tried to circle around while Sarah was focused on Davies. She caught the movement in her peripheral vision and swung the rifle toward him. "Stay back." "Easy, girl, easy." Mills kept moving, trying to get an angle on her. Sarah could hear Jack and Tommy fighting behind her, could hear Davies cursing as he tried to stop the bleeding from his shoulder. "Sarah, run!" Jack shouted while wrestling with Tommy in the mud. "I'm not leaving you." Mills made his move, rushing toward Sarah with his weapon drawn. She fired without hesitation, the rifle jumping in her hands. Mills screamed and went down hard, clutching his right leg where the bullet had shattered his knee. "Jesus Christ, she shot me." "Should have stayed back." Tommy managed to get the upper hand on Jack, rolling on top of him and pinning his arms. From somewhere, he produced a knife, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed even in the gray morning light. "Where are the photos, old man?" Jack spat mud from his mouth. "Go to hell." Wrong answer. Tommy pressed the knife against Jack's throat, just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "I'll gut you like we did your wife." Something primal erupted in Jack's chest, a roar of pure rage that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He bucked upward with inhuman strength, throwing Tommy off balance. In one fluid motion, Jack rolled, twisted, and came up with the knife in his own hands. Now it was Tommy, pinned in the mud with cold steel against his throat. "You want to know what happened to your father?" Tommy's eyes went wide with fear. "I didn't just kill him. I made him suffer." "Jack." Sarah's voice cut through his rage like a blade. Jack's eyes were wild, filled with years of suppressed fury and grief. He begged at the end, begged like a coward. "Jack, don't. He deserves it. Don't become like them." Davies struggled to sit up, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes still defiant. "You want the truth, Morrison? Fine. Here's your fucking truth." Jack pressed the knife deeper against Tommy's throat. "Talk. Your investigation was getting too close. Mayor Caldwell was taking bribes from the mining company. Big money. Millions. Catherine, she worked at the bank, saw the deposits, started asking questions." Jack's hands shook with the effort of restraint. "So you killed her?" "Tommy's father did the actual work. We just facilitated." "And Emma." Davies coughed, blood speckling his lips. Wrong place, wrong time. She was supposed to be at school. The knife bit deeper into Tommy's throat. A drop of blood welled up and ran down into the mud. "Papa was just following orders," Tommy gasped. "Your papa was a murderer." "So are you." Jack raised the knife, ready to finish what had started 5 years ago, but Sarah's voice stopped him cold. "Jack, look at me." Jack's eyes were wild, full of rage and pain that went back generations. He looked like a man standing on the edge of an abyss. If you kill him, you become them. They took everything. They took mine too. But we're better. Are we? Sarah stepped closer, still keeping her rifle trained on the wounded men. Yes, we survived. We didn't become monsters. I want to kill him. I know. But Emma wouldn't want that. Jack's face crumpled at the mention of his daughter's name. The knife wavered in his grip. She was good, Jack. Pure. Don't stain her memory with this. Jack looked down at Tommy's terrified face, then back at Sarah. Slowly, carefully, he pulled the knife away from Tommy's throat. "You're lucky she's here," he whispered. Tommy scrambled backward through the mud, putting distance between himself and Jack's fury. Sarah helped Jack to his feet, then kept her rifle trained on the 3 wounded men while Jack went to the barn. He returned with a coil of rope, the kind used for securing livestock. "Tie them up." "With what hands?" Davies snarled, clutching his wounded shoulder. "Figure it out." Sarah had already pulled out Jack's cell phone and dialed emergency services while Jack secured the men. Her voice was steady, clear, as she gave their location and requested immediate backup. "State police," she told Jack quietly. "Not local." "Good." In the distance, sirens began to wail. The sound grew closer, echoing across the empty fields like the voices of the dead finally demanding justice. Davies looked up from where he sat, tied against a fence post. "You think this is over? You think this changes anything?" "It changes everything. There are others, more people involved than you know." Jack tightened the rope around Tommy's wrists. "Then we'll deal with them too. You're both dead. You just don't know it yet." Sarah walked over and looked down at Davies with eyes that had seen too much pain to be frightened by threats. "We were already dead," she said quietly. "Now we're alive again." The sirens grew louder, and Sarah could see flashing lights cresting the hill at the end of the drive. Help was coming. Justice was coming. After 5 years of silence and suffering, the truth was finally going to see daylight. Jack stood beside her, watching the police cars approach through the rain. His clothes were torn and muddy, his face streaked with blood and dirt, but his shoulders were straight for the first time since she'd known him. "Think they'll believe us?" Sarah held up the cell phone. "I recorded everything." Jack looked at her with something approaching admiration. "Smart girl. I learned from the best." The first police car pulled into the yard, followed by 2 more. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, assessing the scene quickly and professionally. Sarah set down the rifle and raised her hands, as did Jack. "We're the ones who called," Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "These men killed my family 5 years ago." The lead officer approached cautiously. "Anyone need medical attention?" "Those 3 do," Jack said. "We defended ourselves." As the officers began securing the scene and calling for ambulances, Sarah picked up Emma's photograph from where it had fallen during the fight. The picture was muddy, but undamaged, the little girl's smile still bright and innocent. "She would be proud of you," Sarah said quietly. Jack nodded, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "Yeah, maybe she would." The nightmare was finally over. The truth was coming to light. And, for the first time in years, both Sarah and Jack could breathe freely. The state police cars lined the muddy driveway like a parade of justice. Sarah sat on the porch steps, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching paramedics load Davies into an ambulance. His shoulder was bandaged, his face pale, but his eyes still held that defiant glint that said he wasn't finished fighting. Jack stood nearby, giving his statement to Detective Martinez, a serious woman with graying hair and kind eyes. Sarah could hear fragments of their conversation drifting over the sound of radios and engines. "Mr. Morrison, we found the evidence files." "Where?" "Hidden in your old office, just like you said." Jack's whole body went rigid. "And Mayor Caldwell, 3 others arrested this morning. The mining company's going down." Sarah watched Jack's shoulders finally relax for the first time since she'd known him. The tension that had lived in his spine for 5 years seemed to melt away, leaving him looking smaller but somehow more solid, more real. The photographs you mentioned, safe in evidence. We'll need you to testify. Whatever it takes. Detective Martinez glanced over at Sarah. What about her? She saved my life. She also shot 2 police officers. She defended herself against murderers. Martinez nodded slowly. Self-defense seems pretty clear-cut. We'll need her statement, but I don't see charges being filed. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she hadn't realized was there. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, the law was on her side. The last ambulance pulled away as evening approached, taking Tommy Caldwell and his shattered leg to the county hospital. He'd be under armed guard until his arraignment, but that was someone else's problem now. Sarah and Jack had done their part. Detective Martinez handed Jack a card. We'll be in touch about the trial. Both of you should consider victims' advocacy services. This kind of trauma doesn't just go away. We'll manage. Martinez looked at Sarah, then back at Jack. You've got something good here. Don't let the past poison it. After the last police car disappeared down the drive, Sarah and Jack found themselves alone on the front porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed impossible after everything that had happened. Both of them were bandaged. Jack's knuckles wrapped, Sarah's shoulder bruised from the rifle's recoil, but they were alive. Why didn't you turn in the evidence before? Sarah pulled out her notebook, wrote quickly. Why didn't you run away from your father sooner? Fair point. Fear makes us small. Yeah, it does. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Sarah's throat felt raw from all the talking she'd done with the investigators, but the soreness was almost pleasant. Her voice was coming back, rusty but real. Jack? Yeah? Why did you hire me? Really? Jack was quiet for a long moment, rolling tobacco between his fingers. Honestly, you reminded me of Emma. Same stubborn chin. And now you remind me of Catherine. Same brave heart. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd never thought of herself as brave, just desperate. Sarah, I need to ask you something. What? That night, when you called me Papa in your sleep, Sarah's face went red. She looked away, studying the weathered porch boards. You don't remember? I remember. Why? Sarah was quiet for so long Jack thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, because that's what I always wanted, a father who would protect me instead of hurt me. Jack's eyes filled with tears, and I wanted a daughter who would stay instead of being taken away. Is that what we are now? Family? If you want to be. So what happens now? Now? Now we fix this place up, make it a home again. Both of us? If you want to, if you can stand an old man's nightmares. Only if you can stand mine. Jack almost smiled. Deal. Sarah stood up, brushing dust from her jeans. I'll be right back. She disappeared into the house, returning a few minutes later with something in her hands. Emma's photograph, now carefully placed in a small wooden frame she'd found in one of the closets. Where should we put this? Jack took the framed photo, running his thumb over the glass. Kitchen table, so she can watch us eat dinner. Jack? Yeah? Would it be okay if I called you Papa when I'm not scared? Jack's voice broke completely. Sarah, honey, I'd be honored. Sarah's smile was watery but genuine. Papa. The word felt strange on her tongue, foreign after years of silence, but also right, like something she'd been practicing her whole life without knowing it. Come here, daughter. Sarah moved closer, and Jack wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stood together on the porch as darkness fell over the ranch, two broken people who had found something whole in each other's wreckage. Behind them, the house glowed with warm light from every window. No more hiding in shadows, no more sleeping with one eye open. The master bedroom door stood open for the first time in years, clean sheets on the bed, women's clothes finally removed from the closet. You know what I realized today? What's that? Papa. Jack smiled at the sound of the word. This house has been dead for 5 years, but it's not dead anymore. No, it's not. Sarah's voice carried across the evening air as she practiced saying Papa. in different ways, testing how it felt, making it her own. Each repetition seemed to heal something inside both of them, filling spaces that had been empty for too long. "Papa, are you hungry?" "Starving." "What do you say we make some dinner?" "Together?" "Together." Jack stood up, joints creaking, and held out his hand. Sarah took it without hesitation, letting him pull her to her feet. "You know what else?" "What?" "I love you, daughter." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. "I love you too, Papa." They walked toward the house together, toward the light spilling from every window, toward the kitchen where Emma's photograph would watch over their first meal as a real family. Behind them, the porch settled into darkness. But inside, every room blazed with warmth and life. The ghosts were finally at rest. The past had been faced and conquered. And in the morning, Sarah and Jack would wake up in a house that was no longer haunted by what had been lost, but filled with what had been found. At the threshold, Jack paused and looked back at the land that stretched away into darkness. Somewhere out there, justice was being served. Somewhere out there, powerful men were learning that their power had limits. But here, in this house, two survivors had built something new from the ashes of their separate tragedies. They had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found home. "Come on, daughter, let's go home." Sarah squeezed his hand and followed him inside, where the light was warm and the future was whatever they chose to make it. The door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing out the darkness and sealing in the love that would carry them forward, one day at a time, one meal at a time, one papa and daughter at a time, home at last.